So firstly, you're going to place your stick and stitch onto your garment. So I've put the name in the centre here, then the slightly larger cluster just on the left hand side of the name, and then the smaller one curved round to the right of the name. Now for the name, we're going to use chain stitch. So you bring the needle through the fabric, leaving a little tail behind here that we're going to use to tie off at the end. And then bringing the needle back down through the same hole, bringing the needle up a stitch length ahead and hooking the yarn over. So we're putting the needle through the same hole, bringing it a stitch length ahead and hooking the yarn over, just like that. Now as you can see here, I'm holding the yarn to one side with my non-needle hand. That just keeps the yarn taut, creating really nice, neat stitches, also meaning that it's really easy to create that little loop here that's being hooked over the needle. So you're just going to repeat this process following the lines on your stick and stitch pattern. So bringing the needle a stitch length forward, passing the needle through the centre of the new loop and gently pulling. Now I'm trying to do one continuous stitch, so I've left enough yarn so I can try and join as many of the letters I can, just creating a really smooth finish to your letters. And you just continue with this same technique, following the lines on the fabric until you come to the end of your letter. And then to finish the chain stitch, you just poke the needle through to the reverse of the fabric, anchoring the stitch in place. And here to join the letters up, I'm taking the leftover yarn from one letter and bringing it through the next letter. And to tidy up the reverse of the fabric, where I've got two pieces of yarn right next to each other, I just tie those in a knot and cut off the excess. Or where I have a piece of yarn on its own, as you can see, I'm weaving it through the reverse of the chain stitch. And I do this 4 or 5 times and then just cut off the excess yarn. Now for the petals, I'm bringing the needle up at the base of where I want the petal to be, again leaving a little tail of yarn, putting the needle back down through the same hole, and then it's coming up at the end of the petal, and I'm hooking that yarn over the needle, and then adding a little stitch to anchor it into place. So again, needle up and through the same hole, I've created a loop that I'm hooking over the needle and then anchoring it into place. I'm moving the fabric as I go, following a clockwise direction. So needle up through the fabric, needle through the same hole, bringing the needle up at the tip of your petal, hooking the yarn over, and then bringing the needle to the outer edge of that petal. And you're just going to continue doing this until all the petals have been filled every time you're bringing that needle through the center of the flower. And then once you do that final petal, which can sometimes be a little bit of a squeeze, so hooking that loop over the needle, poking it through the fabric, and then you're taking that end piece of yarn and bringing it in line with the beginning leftover tail of yarn from when you started your first petal. And I just tie 2 or 3 very simple knots and just cut off the excess yarn. Now for the roses, we're using woven wheel. So I've brought the yarn up through the centre of the wheel, and then I'm bringing it to the outer edge, following the little lines in your stick and stitch pattern. And then through the outer edge and through the middle, again through the outer edge and through the middle. And these are just little spokes which are going to act as the base for the rose. So you're going to do this 5 times. It's really important whenever you're creating a rose to always ensure that it's an odd number of spokes for the base of the wheel. This doesn't work with even numbers. So once you've got those 5 straight stitches, and then bringing the needle up slightly off center, and what we're going to do is weave the yarn over and under these little spokes until you come to the outer edge of the circle. And you're just going to continue bringing the yarn under and over. It gets a little bit trickier towards the end. It's a little bit harder to kind of see those base spikes. Needle under, needle over, needle under. And you continue just moving the fabric and weaving that yarn up and under those spokes until you can't do any more. And then I'm poking the yarn through to the back of the fabric as so, bringing the 2 pieces of yarn together from when you started and finished your rose. And I'm just going to tie those off. And for the centre of the daisies, we're going to do a French knot. So you're bringing the needle in the point of the fabric where you want the knot to be, leaving that little tail as before. And then holding the yarn taut in your non-needle hand, you wrap it around the needle 3 times, and you're poking the needle back through the fabric very close to where it first came through. And you just pull that through as such. Then you take the first tail of yarn and you pull that taut as so, and that just creates a really neat little knot in the centre. So again, bring it through, wrap it round 3 times, poke the needle back through, give it a pull, and then what you're going to do is tie off that start and end piece of yarn. Just again, 2 or 3 times is plenty, and then cut that off. Now for the greenery, I'm using split stitch for the long line down the middle. So you're going to create 1 straight stitch, bring the needle up a stitch length ahead, and then you're going to pierce the needle of the previous stitch with the yarn. So needle up 1 stitch length ahead, pierce the middle of that previous stitch with the needle, and pull it through. And then again, a stitch length ahead and through the centre of the last stitch. So it's quite similar to back stitch, although you're bringing the stitch through the middle of the previous stitch rather than to the end of it. Now once you've completed that central line, we're going to add the leaves, and we're going to use Lazy Daisy Stitch, the same as we did for the petals. So creating a little loop to hook over the needle, then you just anchor it into place. And then what I'm going to do is on the reverse of the fabric, I'm going to turn it over and just weave the yarn through the inside of the fabric. Then I'm going to bring it back up through to the front of the fabric to create another leaf. So Lazy Daisy Stitch, create a little loop, bring the needle up to the end of where you want the leaf to be, hook the little loop over, poke the needle through to anchor it into place, and then just bring the yarn back to where that first tail of yarn was. You can just tie those off together. And lastly, once the design is finished, you're going to remove the paper. That just comes off really easily with water.